A couple is brutally attacked in their home.
Mobile 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Hey, somebody just got shot.
He had sustained gunshot wounds to the head.
9mm cartridges trailed all the way down to the street.
And she got shot 16 times.
Then he went back to set the house on fire.
Detectives worked tirelessly to piece together what happened.
They uncover every stone in order to find the person who did this.
This is a scary person to be running around on the streets.
We have to get answers as quickly as possible.
Then, the case takes a miraculous turn.
I woke up in ICU.
We had a surviving victim.
I remember him shooting me in the streets like a dog.
But will they be able to catch the killer before it's too late?
He told me it was in the mouth.
It's one of the most intentional and pre-planned crimes that I've ever seen as a prosecutor.
I was scared if he was going to come back to kill me.
I can't imagine anything more terrifying.
They're wondering, are we ever going to see justice?
Hey, man, you don't have to...
December 24th, 2021. It's the morning before Christmas in Pritchard, Alabama, a small town of 20,000 just northwest of Mobile.
Pritchard is right on the outskirts of Mobile. It is like Mobile's little sister.
There's a lot of cultures, a lot of diversity.
It's a hidden gem here along the Gulf Coast.
And like anywhere else, the holiday season is a time for peace and goodwill. Which is why what's about to happen will be doubly shocking to local resident Demetrius Jordan.
What the?
Who's thinking that you're gonna hear gunshots on Christmas Eve?
Demetrius runs out on his porch to see what's going on.
He sees this man pointing a gun at this woman who's laying on the ground in broad daylight.
They're in front of his neighbor, Quincy Kemp's house.
Hey! I'm calling the cops!
He yells out he's gonna call the police. The guy runs away.
As the shooter flees, Demetrius runs back inside and grabs his phone.
Mobile 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Hey, somebody just got shot.
"40-year-old Quincy Kemp's first love was music.
He always liked music. That was his safe space. Because whenever he was stressed out or going through something, he would just get out in the yard and he would play.
Quincy was very talented. He played the drums, he played the tuba, he played the trombone, he played the organ, the piano, but his instrument of choice was the trumpet. He played with maybe 3 different bands.
When he got accepted to that band, I got it. I was like, what you got? He said, I tried out for the Olympia band. I tried out for the Port City brass band. And I got into both of them.
He played with the Mardi Gras band, too.
Which was a big deal in Mobile.
There's a definite sense of Mobile pride here, and that pride most often comes up when you start talking about Mardi Gras.
A lot of people don't know, but Mobile is the founder of Mardi Gras. It's not New Orleans. We had it first, and we're very proud of that. We have a lot of fun during the Mardi Gras season, lots of parades.
Nobody does it like us. And we knew when those bands was coming, Quincy was marching.
Unfortunately, Quincy's love life was less fulfilling.
He'd long since split from the mother of his 2 teenage boys.
And he'd recently divorced their stepmother, too.
His divorce was brutal because he wasn't ready to let that go. So he found himself in like a dark, dark place.
He would come to my house and pretty much just cry, like, I don't understand.
I remember like telling him like, you need to leave Mobile. Nothing was really holding him there.
But everything changed when Quincy met Shonda Avery in April of 2021.
I met Quincy, what they call a hit house in Mobile.
A hit house is basically what's known as a juke joint, or a place where people can dance and drink.
Much like Quincy, Shonda was also going through a divorce.
Hey, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'll be back. A girlfriend of mine took me out to get my mind off of things. And lo and behold, Quincy at the bar wanted to buy me a drink. I turned him down. I told him it's okay, because I wasn't really there to meet anybody.
A beautiful woman should never have to pay for her own drinks.
But he would not take no for an answer. So I just give up. I'm letting him buy me a drink.
And once they started talking, they really hit it off.
I guess they clicked and was sharing the same struggles.
People are meant for connection. So in this case, Shonda and Quincy did have similar experiences.
We did exchange numbers that night.
Slowly over the next few months, Shonda and Quincy got to know one another.
We spent a lot of time together. We talked daily. We text all the time.
They'd have lunch, leaning on each other for emotional support.
Quincy picked up the tab when they went to go have dinner, and Quincy called her and he checked on her, and was just something she had never experienced in her life. And that was really special to her.
Quincy was a gentleman. He opened doors. He pulled out chairs. If I was walking on the side of the curb, he'll push me in on the other side of him.
Quincy treated her like a princess.
And by the end of September, they were officially dating.
We enjoyed each other's company. We had fun together.
But now, after Quincy's neighbor called 911 to report a shooting, first responders have arrived outside his house.
Immediately, they see Miss Avery laying down with multiple gunshot wounds.
She's barely breathing, but she's still alive.
While the EMTs work quickly to load her into the ambulance and rush her to the hospital, police head inside to clear the house.
They had no idea what was waiting for them.
They went back to one of the back bedrooms.
They find Quincy on the couch, deceased.
He had sustained a couple of gunshot wounds to the head.
Both on the rebound from failed marriages, it appeared that Shonda Avery and Quincy Kemp had found happiness together.
Shonda was happy that she found somebody like Quincy who, cared for her and showed her love and compassion.
We had fun together. There was never a dull moment with Quincy.
But now, after a neighbor called 911 and reported hearing gunshots, first responders have found Shonda severely wounded on the street in front of Quincy's home.
The EMTs rush her to the hospital.
But there's nothing they can do for Quincy.
He's dead in the house, killed by 2 gunshot wounds to the face.
When detectives arrive, they find the scene is littered with shell casings.
There was 3 9mm shell casings in the bedroom.
And then there were 16 fired 9mm cartridges that trailed from the front doorsteps of that house all the way down to the street.
There are also no signs of forced entry.
You have to wonder, how did the person get in the house? Was it somebody that was familiar with them where they let them in? Or was it a breaking and entering type thing?
But then once you start to go through the house, you notice that there aren't any items that have been taken. It clearly suggested that whoever did this knew Shonda and knew Quincy.
This looked like it was a personal attack, a targeted hit.
Who would have such malice intent to want to kill 2 people in cold blood on Christmas Eve?
After looking over the crime scene, detectives turn to Quincy's neighbor, Demetrius Jordan.
He's the one who first called 911.
I woke up to gunshots, and I opened my front door to try to see what was going on.
He says by the time he got out to his porch, Shonda was on the ground.
He was witnessing the shooter standing over Shonda.
He saw him standing over her and then running off.
He stood over Shonda, cocking the gun as if he either jammed up or he was reloading.
But considering the number of shell casings at the scene, detectives believe the gun may have just been empty.
And I said, I'm calling the police. He struck out running.
He was able to give a physical description and also a clothing description.
He had seen an individual with a multicolored hoodie on.
But the 911 caller was not able to say who the assailant was.
He never got a clear look at his face.
But since the shooting happened in broad daylight, detectives hope someone else did. So they go next door.
Another neighbor of Quincy Kemp said earlier that day he had been outside on his back porch and he had noticed that someone was crawling in through the window of Quincy's house.
I seen a guy push that air conditioner right here, and I seen him go in.
Once inside the house, the neighbor says the man put the AC unit back in the window.
They, of course, ask him, why would you not call police if you saw someone committing some type of burglary?
The neighbor said he thought it was somebody Quincy had known.
He like the same guy who used to drink and puts on the foot. So I thought he had lost it, you know.
He said shortly after the individual removed the AC and went in, that's when Quincy, Shonda, and his father showed up.
I thought he was in Cooper, family out there.
So at that point in time, he says he goes and gets into the shower.
But then a few minutes later, he heard gunshots.
He says he looks out the window and he sees someone running down the road wearing that same multicolored hoodie that he had, seen the individual going into the house.
As detectives finish talking to the neighbor, Quincy's dad pulls up to the scene.
Somebody called me who lived behind Quincy. And remind you, this is a small town. We all grew up here. She was like, they're shooting at your brother's house. And while she's talking, you can hear the shots in the background. Bow, 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 bow. So I called my dad.
His father was nearby when we got a phone call saying that there was a shooting at Quincy's house. And then he went back to the scene.
Speaking with detectives, he's stunned to learn his son is dead.
He said he'd only just left.
Quincy's father actually met him at his house that morning while he was getting a ladder from him to do a job around the corner.
Quincy had done work with his father for years. They worked construction jobs together.
I was going to get the ladder, but Quincy drove up behind me.
Quincy helped his dad load the ladder into the truck. Then his dad took off to go to his job, just a few blocks away.
This guy is literally around the corner with his child being killed.
Although he didn't know that until he'd driven back to Quincy's house, just to make sure everything was okay.
He saw the police personnel and then the crime scene tape up, so that's when things began to sink in with him that Quincy may not be okay.
Asked if he'd gone into the house while he was picking up the ladder, Quincy's dad says no.
He's also pretty sure that Shonda had not gone inside either until he had pulled off.
He says Shonda was there because he thinks she spent the night with Quincy.
And he wasn't very happy about that.
My dad didn't approve of the relationship.
I was telling him to get rid of her.
And when asked why, his answer is simple.
Shonda was still married.
The father of shooting victim Quincy Kemp has just told detectives that Quincy's girlfriend, Shonda Avery, is married.
Shonda, also gravely injured in the shooting, has already been rushed to the hospital.
Quincy's father says that Shonda's husband is a man named Maurice Sashington.
She was going through a divorce, but it has not been finalized.
Has he ever talked about having any type of physical altercation or confrontation with Maurice?
He ain't never been that kind of fella, you know. He wasn't a fighter.
However, he does admit there have been some strange events happening lately.
Someone had thrown gasoline on Quincy's car one night and tried to set it on fire.
The police said must have been somebody weak gas because it didn't do a whole lot of damage.
The fire department said, well, whoever got this gas had warned it.
Quincy's dad had also heard that someone had tried to run him off the road.
But Quincy never accused Maurice of being behind any of the incidents.
We all got on the group chat and was like, okay, does this have anything to do with her? And he's like, no, it's not.
That was just hearsay.
But Quincy's dad does say he cautioned his son about dating a married woman.
My dad was not comfortable with Shonda being at the house.
He said he didn't think it was a good idea and that they needed to have a little bit of distance.
In fact, he told his son that messing with a married woman was going to get him hurt.
I was trying to get him straight.
So had his father's prediction proven correct?
Detectives need to talk to their best eyewitness, Shonda.
I felt real bad for her, but I wanted to get all the details from her so I can help put this individual behind bars.
Hoping she can ID the shooter, detectives head to the hospital.
But she's still in surgery.
Shonda's fighting for her life.
She died in the ambulance. She died on the table, and they brought her back.
She got shot 16 times.
Most people that sustain or go through this type of situation do not survive.
So for the time being, there's nothing the detectives can do but go back to the office and run Maurice's name through their system.
He didn't have a terrible, violent history involving criminal charges.
There wasn't anything just completely outlandish to suggest that he was capable of doing something of this nature.
But they do discover that Shonda had taken out a protection order against Maurice shortly before the shooting.
She claimed Maurice had been stalking her.
He would call me, he would text me and let me know that he was sitting outside my house.
The order also showed that Maurice had sent Shonda a series of odd, vaguely threatening texts.
He sent a song by Tupac called Troublesome, and she listened to the song and, she knew that, there could be something to the threats that he was making.
With Maurice now a person of interest in the murder, detectives issue a be on the lookout for him.
The first thing investigators did was try to start apprehending him to get a statement for him.
They went to his house. He wasn't there. They talked to family. They hadn't heard from him in a couple of days.
His family members were uncooperative.
Detectives also head to Alabama State Docks, where Maurice had been working.
We learned that he had just left that job in November, the month leading up to the homicide.
He had gone to pick up a check or something, and no one heard from him for a while.
Did this mean that Maurice has skipped town?
But then, on Christmas Day, the day after Quincy's murder, Mobile County 911 receives another urgent call.
It's from one of Quincy's neighbors.
The fire department was called to extinguish a fire at Quincy's residence.
Detectives investigating Quincy Kemp's murder have just learned that firefighters have been called to a fire at his house.
Not even 24 hours after the shooting took place, on Christmas Day, someone lit the home on fire.
By the time detectives made it to the scene, firefighters had the blaze under control.
Entering the charred bedroom, the detectives immediately suspect arson.
Looking at the area where the fire was started in relation to where the shooting transpired, we knew it was the individual who committed the murder, came back and tried to destroy that area of the house where the crime took place.
I believe that was intentionally done to try to destroy any evidence that may be in the house.
Unfortunately, there was still nothing at the scene that could tie Maurice or anyone to the shooting or the arson.
With Maurice in the wind, detectives catch a break when several days later they get a call from a supervisor at the docks in nearby Pascagoula, Mississippi.
He stated that he knew Maurice was a person of interest in the case and wanted to give police some info.
He said that Maurice had worked for him the days prior to and just after the murder.
The supervisor says that he hasn't shown up for a couple of days now. However, he has a friend that's a co-worker there named Red that is pretty familiar with Maurice and could possibly have more information on his whereabouts.
Detectives head over to Pascagoula to track down Red.
His real name is Jerome Wilson.
And Jerome agrees to speak with detectives.
He said that he knew Maurice from working various dockside jobs with him.
So how long have you known Maurice?
I'd say about 3, maybe 4 years.
He said he'd actually spoken to Maurice about 2 days prior.
He felt very conflicted about the whole situation.
Asked about Shonda, Jerome says Maurice had mentioned that they'd been having problems.
I remember they were going through a divorce.
But to Jerome, it seemed like Maurice had been handling the situation well overall.
He said that it just wasn't going to work out and they both decided to part ways. It was a mutual thing.
So he says he was shocked when he saw on the news that Shonda had been shot and the police were looking for Maurice.
He fooled me. I ain't see that.
He had one idea of who this person was based on who he was at work. And so then to look on the news and see that he's possibly committed a crime such as this, that was moments of disbelief.
It can be very difficult to be the person who is close to someone who commits a crime because you feel like you know a person, and then to find out that they could do something so terrible makes you wonder, do I know anyone?
In fact, Jerome says he was so shocked that he'd actually called Maurice.
Jerome asked, like any friend would, what's going on? What happened?
Like, you know, what they said on the news.
So he admitted that the news was right about him being the guy?
I ain't gonna say he admitted. I ain't gonna say that.
He didn't deny it, though.
I can't tell that. No, he didn't deny.
He didn't deny it, and he didn't confirm that he did it.
Jerome tells detectives that Maurice was also cagey with him about where he was headed.
He told me it was in the mountains.
He finishes the conversation by telling Jerome that he's going off the grid, and that was the end of the conversation.
Jerome says that when he tried to call Maurice back again later, he couldn't reach him.
It seemed like he disposed of that phone, didn't want anyone tracking that phone number to be able to find his location.
From Jerome's statement, detectives are now all but certain that Maurice is the man who killed Quincy and shot Shonda 16 times.
But they still can't prove it.
And then the case takes a turn for the good.
Shonda is out of ICU and is able to talk.
Detectives investigating the shooting that killed Quincy Kemp and put his girlfriend Shonda in the hospital have learned that Shonda is finally well enough to give them a statement.
The fact that Shonda miraculously survived was huge for investigators.
Shonda really blessed. God was with her.
Detectives head to the hospital to interview her.
You could tell she was in a lot of pain, but her recollection of the events was as raw as the day it happened.
I recall every moment, every day.
Miss Avery showed a great amount of strength.
Shonda starts out by explaining that she'd been married to Maurice for about 2 years, but they'd known each other far longer.
Maurice and Shonda had been in a kind of on-again, off-again relationship for years.
They share a 4-year-old daughter together.
The beginning of my relationship with Maurice was awesome. You got this puppy love, and you want to be away from that person.
But after the birth of their daughter, Shonda says everything changed.
He started drinking a little more than usual. He showed me his true colors after he got the wife and the child.
Shonda said he would just explode and become angry a lot.
He would leave me places when he got drunk. He would embarrass me and cuss me out, but he's never hit me, struck me, pushed me. He gave no indication that he was violent.
But Shonda says their trip to New Orleans in the spring of 2021 was the last straw.
On my birthday, we went to New Orleans, and he got upset. He embarrassed me walking up Bourbon Street and just cussed me out. And I was boohoo not crying in front of hundreds of people.
After that, Shonda filed for divorce.
She told him she didn't want to be with him anymore and that she didn't love him anymore.
Then she met Quincy.
It wasn't until she met Quincy that she realized, I can do better. I deserve better. There's people out there that will treat me better.
I can imagine that it is very difficult to transition from toxicity to health.
It was at this point, she says, that Maurice started stalking her.
It really amplified things when he found out that she had a relationship developing with Quincy.
This is also when he started sending her violent messages.
He would call me, he would text me and let me know that he was sitting outside my house. That's when I put the protective order in for him to stay away.
She had trespassed him from her home. She had filed for divorce. She had done everything that she could to distance herself from this.
She says that he responded with death threats against her and Quincy.
I thought he was just blowing off steam. I would never have imagined in a million years that he was capable of doing something like this.
When questioning turns to the day of the shooting, Shonda tells detectives she is sure it was Maurice that pulled the trigger.
What I need you to do on my quarter right here, I need you to tell me who exactly shot you.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on. You can talk to it.
Okay. Oh, Maurice actually just shot.
Then she walks them through what happened.
I spent the night over Quincy's.
That next morning on Christmas Eve, she said they ran to the store and came back to the house.
Then Quincy had just pulled back up and come to the store, and his dad was already there.
My dad came over to say, no, give me the ladder.
They had some small talk outside.
And he got the ladder for his father.
Quincy got the ladder and put it on his father's truck, and then the father left Quincy's residence, and Quincy and Shonda went inside Quincy's house.
According to Shonda, they went back to the bedroom where Quincy sat down on the couch.
Hey, have you seen my cigars?
When I looked up, I see Maurice.
He had a gun. He had it pointed right at Quincy's head.
It was frightening.
Quincy was sitting on his couch. He was defenseless.
Maurice! No! Shonda hollered his name. I know for a fact that my brother was terrified.
And so was Shonda.
I was scared out of my mind. That's when I ran.
She ran for her life.
But she knew what happened next.
Shonda said that she heard Quincy's last words.
Ma'am, you'll have to...
Maurice shot him, boom, boom, 2 times in the face.
She heard Quincy being murdered, and she couldn't even process what was happening.
It was so much adrenaline. She said she ain't feel herself go down the steps.
And then Maurice went outside to shoot Shonda.
She described it to me. She just felt her legs go limp and she felt herself falling to the ground.
When she got to the street, she lost consciousness.
Did Maurice come and stand over you or anything?
I remember that.
Okay. But you pretty much for certain Maurice shot you.
Oh, yeah. That was Maurice. That's all I remember until I woke up in ICU. But I do remember that Maurice was the one that shot me and Quincy. I remember him shooting me in the streets like a dog.
I believe that he thought she was dead. And it's honestly a miracle that she wasn't. It's one of the most intentional and pre-planned crimes that I've ever seen as a prosecutor. And it makes it especially egregious considering it was Christmas Eve when it all happened.
But what detectives needed to know now is Maurice's whereabouts.
Ever since Jerome Red Wilson had told them Maurice had gone off the grid, every effort to find him had failed.
When there's someone who murdered a man, basically executed him after breaking into his home and then shot his ex 16 times, that's a scary person to be running around on the streets.
The whole town of Mobile, Alabama is on edge because no one knows where this killer is.
I didn't know where he was, didn't know if he was gonna come back to kill me, finish the job, didn't know if he was gonna hurt my loved ones, Quincy's loved ones.
It was an emotional roller coaster. I remember for myself just feeling so much anxiety. Every day I couldn't sleep.
Then, after 5 agonizing months, detectives get a new lead when an old source reaches out.
Homicide?
Jerome Red Wilson gets a call from a random number, and that person that's calling him is none other than Maurice Sashington.
And according to Jerome, Maurice had given him a clue about where he was hiding out.
He said something about meeting him in Las Vegas.
After 5 frustrating months of trying to bring Maurice Sashington to justice for the shooting that left his estranged wife Shonda critically injured and killed her boyfriend Quincy Kemp, detectives finally have a lead on the fugitive.
Homicide?
According to his friend Jerome Wilson, Maurice had called him a couple of days ago and asked if they could meet up in Vegas.
When we spoke with Red, he mentioned that he was somewhere outside Las Vegas in that area.
Jerome says at first he had no idea it was Maurice calling him.
There wasn't no number I was familiar with.
But it soon became clear once Jerome picked up the call.
In that conversation, Maurice is telling him he's in the mountains near Vegas now, ways away from Mobile, Alabama.
But then he also told Jerome, anyone who tells on me is going to have problems.
I mean, I took that as a threat.
Despite that, Jerome went ahead and spoke with detectives, giving them Maurice's new phone number.
Red's decision to give up essentially his friend was a very difficult one to have to make. The idea of either keeping myself safe or keeping someone else safe was at hand here.
Using the new cell phone number, detectives are able to pinpoint Maurice's location.
They were able to trace that phone out to the remote area in Las Vegas, Nevada. We knew that we had to act on that fast.
Once we got a location of where he was staying, we reached out to the field office in Las Vegas.
We found Maurice Sashington living out of his vehicle with a bunch of burner phones.
He was trying to make it to Mexico, and they got him.
Hey, sideways, 30 feet. 30 feet more. Follow it. Bring your right foot inside. There you go. Quit moving around. Just face the truck, bro. You're all worked up. Relax.
As soon as the detectives hear that Maurice has finally been captured, they fly out to Las Vegas to question him.
But the trip turns out to be a waste.
Plan was going to talk to you. But you don't want to talk to us. Say.
Not without a lawyer, Brandon.
But regardless, Maurice is extradited to Alabama to face the charges.
Once the news broke that Maurice was apprehended, you could really sense this wave of relief and calming emotion really go over the community.
The detective called me and was like, Tosh, we got him. I was like, what? Like, we got him. I was shouting. I was like, thank you, Lord.
My sister Tasha called me and she was just screaming, they got him, they got him, they got him. And I was just like, oh my God, I had to pull over my car. And we prayed and we cried and we gave God thanks. And then I called Shonda and then we were just so excited that they got him.
He was no longer a harm or danger to anybody else.
Still, Quincy's family doesn't just want a conviction. They want him punished to the maximum extent of the law.
We were going for the death penalty.
But when Maurice stands trial in May of 2024, prosecutors decide not to seek the death penalty.
We do have the death penalty in Alabama. We save the death penalty for the absolute worst of the worst. This murder was really an isolated incident in Maurice's life. He had lived most of his adult life without really any issues at all. So we felt that the appropriate punishment would be life without the possibility of parole.
And the prosecutors are confident they can get it.
We had physical evidence, we had eyewitness testimony, we had evidence of flight.
But most of all, they have Shonda, who takes the stand and tells the jury how Maurice killed Quincy, shot her 16 times, and left her for dead.
Trials are always gut-wrenching, and our evidence has to come from the witnesses. We can't ask the officer to tell the jury what Shonda said. Shonda has to be able to do that. There's a lot of people that will not come forward. They won't follow through with what needs to be done to ultimately get justice. And that's something that Shonda did.
My experience with the trial was emotional. Having to relive everything, having to see him every day, having to look at his emotionless face. He said nothing. He sat there, just a blank face. It was a lot to take in.
He's a monster.
She is one of the strongest people that I have ever met. She was brave, she was courageous, and she got up there and she told every single bit of it.
When it's the defense's turn, they try to counter Shonda's testimony the only way they can, by calling her a liar.
They argued that she was trying to pin the shooting on her estranged husband out of spite.
But in the end, Shonda's testimony against her would-be killer makes all the difference.
All 12 jurors agreed beyond a reasonable doubt that he was guilty of attempted murder, and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
The sentence doesn't go far enough for some of Quincy's family.
My sisters, they kept telling me, a win is a win, but I still don't think justice was served.
If he would have got that death penalty, I would have felt a whole lot better. Life and just being in jail, that's the easy way out.
However, Maurice isn't the only one still paying the price for what he's done.
I continually pray for Shonda. She's had multiple surgeries. Even though she lived to tell the story, she has to deal with this every day. It's constant pain.
I get my strength from my children, from Quincy's family, for supporting me this whole time.
But it was Quincy who paid the ultimate price.
My brother was an outstanding guy. He was a man's man. He took care of his kids. He raised them to be good, godly men. He didn't deserve that.
Love on your family. That's all I can tell you. Just love on your family, because one day they're here, the next day they're gone. And you can't bring them back.
There is a profound and unsettling contrast inherent in the concept of paradise. When we think of Honolulu, Hawaii, the mind instinctively conjures images of unblemished beauty, a landscape painted in brilliant hues of azure and emerald. It is a destination constructed in the global imagination as a sanctuary from the harsh realities of everyday life, a place defined by gentle trade winds, golden sunlight, and the rhythmic, soothing cadence of the Pacific Ocean meeting the shoreline. Among the most cherished jewels in this tropical expanse is Ala Moana Beach Park. Spanning over 100 acres, this lush, sprawling green space sits nestled between the relentless urban energy of downtown Honolulu and the vast, tranquil expanse of the sea. By day, it is a theater of vibrant, joyous human activity. Tourists and locals alike converge on its manicured lawns and sandy shores. Families gather under the expansive canopies of banyan trees for afternoon barbecues, the air thick with the scent of grilled food and sunscreen. Joggers trace the paved paths, surfers paddle out toward the distant reef, and the distant hum of traffic from the nearby boulevard is drowned out by the sounds of laughter and the crashing surf. During these sunlit hours, the park feels inherently safe, a communal haven where the worries of the world are temporarily suspended. But landscapes, no matter how beautiful, possess a dual nature. They are transformed by the simple rotation of the earth. When the sun finally dips below the horizon, painting the sky in fleeting shades of violet and crimson before surrendering to the dark, the identity of Ala Moana Park undergoes a radical and immediate shift. The tourists fold their towels and retreat to their high-rise hotels. The local families pack up their coolers and drive back to their suburban neighborhoods. As the twilight deepens, the bright, welcoming openness of the park evaporates, replaced by long, impenetrable shadows. The towering trees, so picturesque in the daylight, become massive, looming silhouettes against the night sky. The sprawling lawns transform into vast, quiet voids. In the absence of daylight, the park ceases to be a playground for the leisure class and becomes something entirely different. It becomes a refuge for those who have nowhere else to retreat. In a city defined by luxury and tourism, there exists a fragile, often invisible population living on the absolute margins of society. For the transient community, the homeless individuals who navigate the extreme cost of living in an island paradise, public spaces like Ala Moana Park are not recreational destinations. They are the entirety of their world. When you do not have a door to lock, a wall to hide behind, or a roof to shelter under, the boundary between the private self and the public domain ceases to exist. Your living room is the grass, your ceiling is the sky, and your security is entirely dependent on the unpredictable nature of the night. To live in the open is to exist in a state of perpetual vulnerability. You are exposed to the elements, to the apathy of a society that often prefers to look away, and most terrifyingly, to the unseen dangers that emerge when the rest of the world goes to sleep. The night in a public park is governed by an unwritten code of survival, a quiet vigilance shared among those who claim a patch of earth in the dark. It is within this hidden, nocturnal ecosystem that our story takes root, anchored in a specific, haunting timeline that has fractured the peace of this location for over 2 decades. The transition from Monday, April the 8th, into the early morning hours of Tuesday, April the 9th, in the year 2002, was supposed to be unremarkable. The weather would have been typical for a Hawaiian spring, the ocean breeze sweeping across the dark park, rustling the leaves that blanketed the ground. For the majority of Honolulu's residents, it was a night of ordinary slumber. But in the deep, quiet isolation of Ala Moana Park, under the cover of darkness, an act of sheer, incomprehensible violence was unfolding. It was an event that would ultimately leave a young man dead, sparking an investigation that remains shrouded in a suffocating silence to this very day. This is not a narrative built on the thrilling pursuit of a known fugitive. It does not feature the cinematic satisfaction of forensic breakthroughs, brilliant courtroom deductions, or the eventual triumph of justice over malice. Instead, this is a story defined entirely by an agonizing, terrifying void. It is a case study in how the truth can be swallowed whole by the environment, how a human life can be violently extinguished in a public space, surrounded by others, yet yield absolutely no answers. The true horror of this case lies not just in the brutality of the act itself, but in the profound emptiness that followed it. It forces us to confront a deeply unsettling reality that it is entirely possible for a horrific crime to occur right next to the bustling heart of a major city, leaving behind a physical scene but taking the narrative into the dark forever. Consider the perspective of the individuals who were the first to shatter the morning calm on that Tuesday. Long before the sun reaches its peak, before the first tourists arrive with their cameras and the joggers begin their daily routes, a different crew claims the park. The municipal maintenance workers, the unseen caretakers of the Paradise Illusion, arrive in the early dawn to reset the stage. Their job is to erase the remnants of the previous day, to sweep the paths, clear the debris, and ensure that the sprawling grounds look pristine and untouched for the new morning. They are accustomed to finding the detritus of human existence, discarded bottles, forgotten belongings, the quiet evidence of the transient population that utilizes the park overnight. But as they moved through the grounds on the morning of April the 9th, their routine was violently interrupted by a discovery that could not simply be swept away or easily forgotten. Lying there on the ground, partially obscured by a bed of fallen leaves, was the body of a man. The tranquil beauty of the morning park stood in stark, sickening contrast to the reality of his condition. The violence inflicted upon him was not accidental. It was severe, deliberate, and catastrophic. The peaceful setting of Ala Moana, a place associated with leisure and vitality, had been transformed into a theater of brutality. The leaves upon which he lay offered no protection and, maddeningly for the detectives who would soon swarm the area, they offered almost no physical narrative of the struggle. The discovery immediately shattered the illusion of the park's safety, pulling back the curtain on the perilous reality faced by those who live in the shadows of the city. The man lying amidst the leaves was Gabriel William Cheney. He was only 28 years old. He had a name, a history, a family, and a life that had originated far from the tropical warmth of Hawaii, in the vast, rugged landscapes of Alaska. Yet, in his final moments, his world had been reduced to the dark, indifferent soil of a public park. The violence that ended his life was not a swift, silent affair. The subsequent medical examinations would reveal that he had suffered massive, forceful trauma to his head, a beating so severe it ultimately proved fatal, complicated by the presence of alcohol in his system. This was an intimate, aggressive act of destruction. It required proximity, energy, and an absolute disregard for human life. And yet, despite the ferocity of the attack, the environment seemed to have absorbed the crime without a whisper. The most chilling dimension of Gabriel Cheney's death is the timeline that immediately preceded it. He was not an isolated hermit living entirely off the grid. The investigation would reveal that just hours before his broken body was discovered by the maintenance crew, he was not alone. In the darkness of the evening on April the 8th, Gabriel was seen socializing. He was seen in the company of other individuals, sharing space, likely sharing drinks, existing within the fragile social network of the park's nocturnal residents. There were voices, there were faces, there was a shared human experience happening just hours before his tragic end. He was a living, breathing participant in the transient community that night. And then, the timeline abruptly fractures. The narrative thread snaps. Between the moment he was last seen in the company of others and the moment the morning sun illuminated his lifeless body, a curtain of absolute darkness falls. Who were the men he sat with? What was the nature of their conversation? Did a sudden argument erupt in the humid night air, escalating rapidly into fatal violence? Or did the people he socialized with leave him alone, making him vulnerable to a stranger emerging from the shadows? These are the questions that have haunted the Honolulu Police Department for over 2 decades. The answers belong to the night, held captive by individuals who either vanished into the transient ether, who were too terrified of retaliation to speak, or who harbored a profound distrust of the authorities. The park, despite being open and public, acted as a soundproof room. A man was brutally beaten, A life was violently stolen, and the collective memory of the witnesses dissolved into the morning mist. When we examine the concept of an unsolved crime, a cold case, we often visualize dusty boxes and fading ink on police reports. But a cold case is far more than an administrative failure. It is an open wound in the fabric of a community. It is a persistent, nagging anomaly that defies our deeply held belief in cause and effect, in actions having consequences. Gabriel Chaney's file remains open, a digital and physical testament to a failure of justice. His story is a haunting reminder that in the margins of society, where people are already overlooked and marginalized in life, they can also become completely invisible in death. The violence he endured is a static, unchanging fact, but the silence surrounding it is active, heavy, and enduring. As we step deeper into the circumstances of his life and the agonizing barriers that brought his investigation to a standstill, we must carry with us the weight of that silence. We must explore how a man can travel from the freezing expanses of Alaska to the sunny shores of Hawaii, only to find himself violently erased in the dark, leaving behind a mystery that continues to cast a long, cold shadow over the island paradise. To understand the profound tragedy of an unsolved murder, we must first dismantle the clinical anonymity of the police file and breathe life back into the victim. The victim in this case was not merely a statistic on a spreadsheet of municipal crime data, nor was he simply a placeholder in a tragic narrative of urban violence. He was Gabriel William Chaney. At the time his life was abruptly and violently extinguished, Gabriel was 28 years old. He was a young man still in the statistical prime of his life, an age typically associated with laying foundations, building futures, and cementing one's place in the world. Instead, Gabriel's existence was defined by a profound sense of transience, a life lived in constant motion and, ultimately, extreme vulnerability. To retrace Gabriel's path is to look at a map of vast geographical extremes. He did not originate in the tropical climate where he met his end. Gabriel's roots were planted far to the north, in the rugged, unforgiving, and expansive landscapes of Alaska. The contrast between the environment of his origins and the location of his death is almost impossibly stark. One is defined by freezing temperatures, sweeping glaciers, and a harsh, isolating winter darkness. The other is characterized by relentless sunshine, warm ocean currents, and the dense, vibrant foliage of the tropics. We do not have the complete narrative of what propelled a young man from the icy expanses of the Alaskan frontier to the balmy, sun-drenched shores of Oahu. The public record does not detail the specific triumphs, failures, heartbreaks, or aspirations that paved his road across the Pacific Ocean. But the sheer distance of that relocation speaks to a deep, underlying narrative of searching. People who cross oceans are usually looking for something: a fresh start, an escape from a difficult past, a warmer climate, or perhaps just a different version of themselves. Whatever Gabriel was seeking when he left Alaska, it is a devastating reality that his journey concluded in the dirt of a public park, his search permanently halted by an act of senseless brutality. Gabriel was not entirely alone in the archipelago, floating completely untethered from any familial anchor. He had a biological and emotional tether to the Hawaiian Islands that extended beyond his own transient existence on Oahu. According to investigative details shared by Honolulu authorities, Gabriel had a sister who was living on the Big Island of Hawaii. This single, vital piece of information fundamentally shifts our perspective of Gabriel. It pulls him out of the monolithic, often dehumanized category of the chronic street dweller and places him back into the context of a family structure. He was a brother. There was someone in the world who shared his blood, who remembered him as a child in Alaska, who held memories of him before he became a victim, and who ultimately had to bear the agonizing weight of his violent death. The proximity of his sister on a neighboring island adds a layer of tragic irony to his situation. They were geographically close, separated only by a short inter-island flight, yet the circumstances of his daily survival placed them worlds apart. Having a loved one who is living on the streets is an experience fraught with a unique, persistent kind of anxiety. There is the constant, low-level dread of the unknown, The terrifying gap between phone calls or sightings and the inescapable worry about their physical safety in a world that is inherently hostile to the unhoused. For Gabriel's sister, the news of his murder would not just be the confirmation of her worst fears, it would be the beginning of an endless, unresolvable nightmare. When a family member is murdered and the killer is caught, there is at least a narrative of accountability, a tangible person to direct the anger toward, and a structured legal process to navigate. But when the murder goes cold immediately, the grieving family is left grasping at shadows. They are forced to live with the agonizing knowledge that the person who destroyed their brother is still walking free, moving through the world without consequence, while their loved one is confined to the past. To comprehend the specific vulnerabilities that led to Gabriel's death, we must confront the harsh reality of his living situation in Honolulu. At the time of his murder, Gabriel was experiencing homelessness. He was navigating the daily, grueling logistics of surviving without a fixed address in one of the most expensive housing markets in the United States. It is crucial to strip away the societal stigma often attached to homelessness and view it strictly through the lens of physical and social vulnerability. When you do not have a home, you are systematically deprived of the basic layers of security that the housed population takes entirely for granted. You do not have a door to lock against physical threats. You do not have a private space to store your belongings, meaning you must carry your entire life with you or risk losing it all. You are subjected to sleep deprivation, the elements, and the constant stress of displacement. Most dangerously, you are forced to exist in a public arena where your physical safety is dependent on the unpredictable behavior of strangers. In a tourist-centric economy like Honolulu, the unhoused population occupies a paradoxical space. They are highly visible in public areas like parks and sidewalks, yet they are simultaneously invisible to the social and institutional structures that offer protection. They are often treated as a nuisance to be managed rather than as vulnerable citizens requiring safeguarding. This marginalized status creates a dangerous ecosystem where predators know they can operate with a diminished risk of consequences. An attacker targeting someone sleeping in a park understands that the victim likely lacks the resources to defend themselves, lacks a safe place to retreat, and, tragically, may not have immediate advocates pushing the authorities for justice if something goes wrong. Gabriel was existing within this precarious reality. Every day was an exercise in basic survival, securing food, finding a safe place to rest, and navigating the complex, unwritten social hierarchies of the street community. His homelessness was not a defining moral failing, it was a state of extreme exposure that ultimately cost him his life. This extreme vulnerability was dangerously compounded by one specific, critical detail regarding his time in the area. Gabriel was not a long-term, entrenched resident of Ala Moana Park. He was a very recent arrival. Law enforcement determined that he had only been staying in that specific park for a short period before he was killed. From an investigative standpoint, this detail is nothing short of disastrous. When homicide detectives begin working a murder case, one of their primary objectives is to meticulously reconstruct the victim's life. They look for routines, established habits, known associates, financial transactions, and any digital footprint that can map out the victim's final days and point toward a motive or a suspect. They interview friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors to understand the victim's social sphere and identify any interpersonal conflicts. But Gabriel's transient status and his recent arrival at Ala Moana Park meant that this crucial historical data simply did not exist. He had no permanent neighbors to hear a disturbance. He had no coworkers to notice his absence. He was a newcomer to the park's fragile, nocturnal community, meaning he had not been there long enough to forge deep, reliable connections with the other people sleeping rough. The men he was seen socializing with on his final night might have known him only by a nickname, or perhaps they had only met him that very evening. This lack of established history created a massive, immediate blind spot for the investigators. Tracing his movements prior to the murder became an exercise in chasing smoke. Detectives were forced to rely on the fading memories and potentially unreliable testimonies of a transient population that is notoriously, and often justifiably, wary of law enforcement. Without a clear picture of who Gabriel was interacting with, what kind of disputes he might have encountered, or what activities he was engaged in during those final, fleeting days, the investigation was severely handicapped from the very first hour. His brief tenure at the park meant he was a ghost long before he actually died, moving through the periphery of society without leaving a discernible trail. He was a stranger in a strange land, completely disconnected from the safety nets that might have saved him, making his sudden, violent exit all the more tragic and difficult to resolve. This devastating combination of factors created a perfect storm of profound anonymity. Gabriel was fundamentally isolated, separated from his original home, alienated from societal protections, and new to the shadows of the park. It was this exact isolation that his unknown killer would ultimately exploit on that fateful April night. The stage was tragically set for an act of violence that would leave behind absolutely no discernible trace for the authorities to follow. The transition from day to night on Monday, April the 8th, 2002, brought the usual metamorphosis to Ala Moana Park. As the sun sank below the Pacific horizon, the vibrant colors of the Hawaiian landscape drained away, replaced by the heavy, enveloping darkness of the tropical evening. The ocean breeze, which offered a cooling respite during the sunlit hours, took on a sharper edge as it swept across the expansive lawns and rustled through the dense canopies of the banyan and palm trees. For the vast majority of Honolulu's residents, the fall of darkness signaled a return to the safety and comfort of their enclosed homes. But for Gabriel William Cheney and the other members of the park's transient community, the night represented a complex shift in reality. It was a time when the public space they occupied became simultaneously more private and infinitely more dangerous. The bustling crowds of tourists and local families dissipated, leaving behind a vast, quiet expanse where the shadows stretched long and deep. In this nocturnal environment, visibility was low, and the ambient noise of the nearby city streets provided a constant, low-level hum that could easily mask the sounds of a struggle. This was the theater in which Gabriel's final hours would play out, a sprawling urban park that offered no walls, no doors, and absolutely no sanctuary from the violence that was about to find him. Sometime during the evening hours of that fateful Monday, Gabriel was not navigating the darkness in isolation. According to the reconstructed timeline pieced together by investigators, he was seen in the company of other individuals who were also utilizing the park as their temporary residence. In the precarious world of the unhoused, these informal gatherings serve a multitude of purposes. They offer a fleeting sense of camaraderie, a pooling of meager resources, and a collective defense against the isolating terror of sleeping rough. To sit with others is to share the burden of vigilance, to find a temporary respite from the constant, draining anxiety of being completely alone and exposed. The men who gathered with Gabriel that night were bound by the shared, grueling circumstance of homelessness. They occupied the same forgotten fringes of the island paradise, navigating the same daily challenges of survival. We do not know the specifics of their conversation. We do not know if they shared stories of their pasts, if they argued over trivial matters, or if they simply sat in weary silence, united only by their proximity in the dark. The identities of these men remain one of the most frustrating and impenetrable mysteries of the entire investigation. They were the last people to look upon Gabriel as a living, breathing human being, yet their faces and names have dissolved completely into the anonymity of the transient night. The gathering that evening was not merely a quiet congregation in the shadows. The evidence suggests that it was accompanied by the consumption of alcohol. The subsequent medical examination would later confirm that Gabriel had a significant level of alcohol intoxication at the time of his death. In the context of chronic homelessness, alcohol often serves as a devastatingly accessible coping mechanism. It is a chemical means to numb the physical pain of sleeping on the hard ground, to temporarily blunt the biting edge of the nighttime cold, and to quiet the relentless psychological stress of living without a safety net. The men sitting in Ala Moana Park that night were likely passing a bottle, seeking a brief, hazy reprieve from their harsh reality. However, this attempt at solace carried a catastrophic secondary effect. Intoxication fundamentally alters a person's situational awareness, their reaction time, and their physical coordination. It lowers inhibitions and can easily escalate minor misunderstandings into major altercations. More tragically, it renders an individual exceptionally vulnerable to predators. A person under the heavy influence of alcohol is less equipped to recognize a developing threat, less capable of defending themselves against a sudden attack, and less able to flee when violence erupts. Gabriel's intoxication that night stripped away whatever meager physical defenses he might have possessed, leaving him utterly unprotected in the face of the brutal assault that was rapidly approaching. And then, the narrative simply stops. There is a precise, terrifying moment on the night of April the 8th when Gabriel William Cheney slips entirely off the grid of human observation. He is seen socializing, he is seen in the company of the other men, and then the timeline fractures irreparably. This is the black hole at the center of the investigation, a void of information that has swallowed every attempt to understand what transpired in those missing hours. Did the gathering disperse peacefully, leaving Gabriel alone to sleep, only for a stranger to stumble upon him in the dark? Did the communal drinking session curdle into a sudden, violent dispute? Did one of the men he was sitting with turn on him with lethal aggression? The silence surrounding these questions is absolute. Because Gabriel was a recent arrival to the park, he lacked the deep, protective friendships that might have prompted someone to intervene or to speak up later. The darkness of Ala Moana Park acted as an accomplice, concealing the faces of the perpetrators and absorbing the sounds of the violence. Whatever happened in that window of time, it happened outside the view of any willing witness. Gabriel was completely isolated, cut off from any possibility of rescue or intervention, trapped in a horrifying, intimate struggle for his life, while the rest of the city slept just a few hundred yards away. The transition from the horrors of the night to the mundane reality of the morning is one of the most jarring aspects of this case. The sun rose on Tuesday, April the 9th, illuminating the Hawaiian landscape with the same brilliant, golden light as any other spring morning. The temperature began to climb, the ocean waters sparkled, and the city of Honolulu slowly stirred to life. At Ala Moana Park, this daily rebirth was signaled by the arrival of the municipal maintenance crews. These workers are the essential, often unseen caretakers of the public space, tasked with the endless, repetitive labor of maintaining the park's pristine appearance. Their morning routine is a choreographed exercise in erasing the evidence of the previous day and night. They empty the overflowing trash receptacles, they sweep the winding paved walkways, and they clear the sprawling lawns of fallen branches and discarded debris. On this particular morning, the crew moved through the park with the practiced efficiency of their daily routine, entirely unaware that the landscape they were tending had been the site of a brutal, fatal assault just hours prior. The beauty of the morning stood in grotesque, silent contrast to the violence that the park was currently concealing. As the maintenance workers progressed through their assigned sectors, their routine carried them toward a specific, shadowed area of the park grounds. Here, the manicured lawns gave way to patches of dirt and accumulations of fallen leaves, the natural detritus shed by the massive trees overhead. It was among these leaves that the ordinary rhythm of the morning was violently and permanently shattered. What initially might have appeared as just another pile of discarded belongings or a sleeping transient quickly resolved into a scene of absolute horror. Lying motionless on the ground, partially obscured by the scatter of dead foliage, was the body of Gabriel William Cheney. The initial shock of the discovery must have been paralyzing. The workers, expecting to find nothing more than empty bottles or food wrappers, were suddenly confronted with the raw, undeniable reality of human mortality. The illusion of the park as a safe, peaceful sanctuary evaporated in an instant, replaced by the grim, terrifying knowledge that a killer had walked among the trees. The immediate response would have been a frantic scramble to contact the authorities, a desperate call echoing through the morning air, transforming the park from a recreational space into an active, contaminated crime scene. The condition in which Gabriel was found spoke volumes about the sheer ferocity of his final moments. The law enforcement officials who quickly descended upon the scene would later describe his body as having been severely beaten. This was not a clean, clinical act of violence. It was a messy, brutal, and physically demanding assault. The trauma inflicted upon his body indicated a terrifying level of rage or a cold, calculated intent to cause catastrophic harm. He was lying amidst the leaves, a setting that offered a heartbreaking visual metaphor for his discarded, vulnerable status in life. The natural environment of the park, the dirt and the foliage, became the final resting place for a young man who had traveled thousands of miles only to be struck down in the dirt. The physical scene, however, was agonizingly barren for the arriving detectives. The leaves and the soil did not hold the clear, definitive forensic clues that investigators desperately needed. There were no obvious, easily identifiable markers pointing toward a specific suspect, no clear path of escape traced in the dirt. The brutality of the act was undeniable, but the identity of the person who committed it remained entirely hidden. The full, grim picture of Gabriel's death was ultimately clarified by the meticulous, clinical work of the Honolulu Medical Examiner's Office. The autopsy results stripped away the remaining ambiguities, providing a cold, scientific account of his final physical trauma. The official cause of death was determined to be severe blunt force trauma to the head, a devastating injury that proved unsurvivable. This finding confirmed the sheer brutality of the assault, indicating that the attacker had targeted the most vital and vulnerable part of Gabriel's body with lethal force. Crucially, the medical examiner also confirmed the presence of a significant level of alcohol intoxication. This dual finding painted a harrowing portrait of his last moments. The alcohol in his system meant that Gabriel was likely severely incapacitated when the attack began. His reflexes would have been sluggish, his ability to mount a defensive struggle severely compromised, and his capacity to cry out for help tragically diminished. The intoxication transformed him from a young, capable man into a deeply vulnerable target, unable to protect himself from the catastrophic blows raining down upon him. He was a victim caught in a nightmare of violence, physically subdued by the alcohol and ultimately destroyed by the relentless, crushing trauma to his head, leaving behind a legacy of silence that would haunt the Honolulu Police Department for decades to come. The arrival of the Honolulu Police Department at Ala Moana Park on that Tuesday morning marked a profound and immediate shift in the landscape's purpose. The sprawling green sanctuary, typically echoing with the sounds of morning joggers and waking tourists, was abruptly cordoned off, transformed by the harsh, brightly colored barrier of yellow police tape into a restricted theater of forensic inquiry. For the detectives stepping out of their vehicles into the warming Hawaiian air, the scene presented an immediate and daunting challenge. The lead investigator assigned to navigate this complex web of violence and silence was Detective James Anderson, a seasoned professional tasked with finding order within the chaotic aftermath of a brutal homicide. When Anderson and his team approached the area where Gabriel William Cheney's body lay, they were not walking into a contained, sterile environment. They were walking into a living, breathing ecosystem, a massive public space that had already been subjected to the elements, the nocturnal movements of the city's transient population, and the early morning routines of the park maintenance crew. The initial assessment of the perimeter immediately revealed the terrifying reality of the situation. A young man had been subjected to an overwhelming, fatal level of physical violence, his life beaten out of him in the dark, yet the surrounding area seemed to offer absolutely nothing in return. The contrast between the sheer brutality of the act and the eerie stillness of the environment created a suffocating atmosphere for the investigators. They stood over a broken body, acutely aware that the person responsible for this horrific destruction had managed to walk away, blending seamlessly back into the waking city, leaving behind a profound vacuum of information that would soon prove nearly impossible to fill. The most immediate and agonizing hurdle facing Detective Anderson and his forensic team was the absolute barrenness of the physical crime scene. In the modern era of criminal investigation, law enforcement relies heavily on the transfer of microscopic evidence, the undeniable scientific truths left behind in the form of biological material, distinct footprints, or discarded weapons. However, Ala Moana Park offered no such conveniences. Gabriel's body was discovered lying on the bare earth, partially covered by a thick layer of fallen leaves and natural debris. From a forensic standpoint, This organic environment is an absolute nightmare. Unlike a linoleum floor or a paved alleyway, which might preserve the crisp outline of a bloody shoe print or a dropped artifact, the dirt and foliage act as a sponge, absorbing and obscuring the physical narrative of the struggle. The leaves that rested beneath and around the victim shifted with every gust of wind, destroying any potential spatial mapping of the attacker's movements. Furthermore, the outdoor setting meant that any potential trace evidence was immediately subjected to the degrading effects of the tropical humidity, the ocean breeze, and the ambient temperature. Detective Anderson would later reflect on the sheer lack of significant physical evidence at the scene, a reality that crippled the investigation from the very first hour. There was no clear trail of blood leading away from the body to indicate the direction the killer fled. There was no discarded blunt instrument hidden in the nearby bushes. There were no obvious fibers or foreign materials caught in the victim's clothing that could easily point to a specific suspect. The killer had inflicted massive, catastrophic trauma upon Gabriel's head, an act that requires significant physical exertion and close proximity, yet they had somehow managed to vanish without leaving a single, definitive piece of themselves behind in the dirt. Recognizing that the earth and leaves would not surrender the killer's identity, the focus of the investigation necessarily shifted from forensic science to human intelligence. Detective Anderson and his team faced the monumental task of canvassing the area, seeking out anyone who might have seen or heard something in the dark hours preceding the discovery. This endeavor, however, was fraught with its own unique and deeply entrenched set of complexities. The potential witnesses to this crime were not typical suburban neighbors looking out through well-lit living room windows. The individuals present in Ala Moana Park that night belonged to Honolulu's unhoused community, a population existing on the extreme margins of society. Investigating a murder within this demographic requires navigating a labyrinth of profound mistrust, transient movement, and deep-seated vulnerability. Many individuals living on the streets harbor a justified wariness of law enforcement, fearing harassment, the confiscation of their meager belongings, or unwanted entanglement in a legal system that often penalizes their very existence. When detectives approached the people sleeping in the park, they were met with a wall of protective silence. The transient nature of the community meant that the men Gabriel had been seen socializing with earlier that evening could have easily packed up their belongings and moved to a different part of the island before the sun even rose. Establishing a baseline of who belonged in the park and who was an outsider was nearly impossible, especially given that Gabriel himself was a very recent arrival to the area. He had not been there long enough to forge the kind of deep, protective bonds that might compel someone to risk their own safety by stepping forward to identify his attacker. The investigators were essentially trying to map a community that was constantly shifting, speaking to witnesses who had every incentive to remain invisible. Faced with this impenetrable wall of silence, the Honolulu Police Department was forced to cast a much wider net, appealing directly to the broader public through the Crime Stoppers program. Detective Anderson understood that the key to unlocking this mystery might not lie in a dramatic eyewitness account of the murder itself, but rather in a seemingly insignificant observation made by a passerby. The police issued public pleas, urging anyone who had been in or around Ala Moana Park on the night of April the 8th to come forward, emphasizing that even the most mundane detail could be the missing piece of the puzzle. Investigators desperately needed to piece together the fractured timeline. They asked the public to report if they had seen a group of individuals suddenly dispersing or fleeing the area in haste. They asked if anyone walking near the park perimeter had heard the chilling sounds of an argument escalating, a sudden shout, or a desperate scream echoing through the trees. They pleaded for information regarding anyone who might have appeared agitated, injured, or acting suspiciously in the vicinity of the park that night. The tragedy of this approach was rooted in the psychology of public perception. Often, people witness fragments of violence or distress but dismiss them, convincing themselves that they are misinterpreting the situation or assuming that it does not involve them. In an urban environment, the sound of raised voices is common, and the sight of people moving quickly in the dark can easily be ignored. Detective Anderson's strategy relied on convincing someone to reconsider a fleeting moment they might have otherwise forgotten. But the silence remained deafening. The recent arrival of the victim, combined with the extreme isolation of the night, meant that Gabriel's final desperate struggle was completely swallowed by the darkness, leaving investigators grasping at shadows and begging the city for a single, illuminating memory that never materialized. As the investigation ground to a frustrating halt, a new and terrifying dimension was added to the narrative, threatening to derail the focus entirely and plunge the unhoused community into a state of absolute panic. Around the same time that Gabriel was killed, the island of Oahu witnessed the brutal deaths of two other homeless men, Tavalaiga Panapa and John Riverio. When a vulnerable population experiences a sudden cluster of violent deaths, fear spreads like wildfire. The immediate and understandable reaction from the transient community, as well as the local media, was to connect the dots and construct a horrifying theory. Whispers began to circulate that a serial killer was actively stalking the parks and alleyways of Honolulu, specifically hunting down the city's most defenseless residents while they slept. This speculation created a nightmare scenario for the police department, forcing them to simultaneously manage a complex homicide investigation and a burgeoning public relations crisis. The fear among the unhoused population was palpable, altering their nightly routines and deepening their distrust of anyone approaching them in the dark. To prevent this panic from completely compromising their efforts, the authorities had to conduct a rigorous, comparative analysis of all three crime scenes. Lieutenant Bill Cato stepped forward to address the mounting anxiety, delivering a crucial assessment of the evidence. He meticulously explained that the investigative teams had thoroughly compared the forensic data, the methods of attack, and the specific circumstances surrounding each victim. The conclusion they reached was definitive. There was absolutely no physical, circumstantial, or evidentiary link connecting the death of Gabriel William Chaney to the murders of Panapa and Riverio. The declaration ruled out the presence of a coordinated serial predator, but this factual clarification offered a devastating secondary consequence. By legally and procedurally separating Gabriel's case from the others, the investigators were forced to acknowledge that his death was an isolated incident of extreme violence. It meant they could not rely on the clues from the other crime scenes to solve his murder. Gabriel was entirely alone in his final moments, and his case was now entirely alone in the files, a solitary tragedy utterly devoid of physical evidence, lacking cooperative witnesses, and rapidly fading into the cold, unforgiving archives of unsolved crimes. In the trajectory of every unsolved homicide investigation, there exists a discernible, agonizing pivot point. It is not a sudden, dramatic halt, but rather a slow, suffocating deceleration of momentum. In the immediate aftermath of a murder, the law enforcement apparatus operates at a fever pitch. Detectives log relentless, sleepless hours. Forensic technicians scour every microscopic fiber of the scene, and the surrounding community remains acutely aware of the tragedy through continuous, urgent media coverage. The atmosphere crackles with the intense, collective anticipation of an imminent arrest, fueled by the belief that justice is simply a matter of time and effort. However, when the physical landscape surrenders absolutely no clues, when the forensic science provides no definitive matches, and when the human intelligence network completely dries up, that initial burst of frenetic energy begins to inevitably wane. The transition of Gabriel William Chaney's murder from an active, urgent inquiry into a stagnant, immovable cold case was a masterclass in this agonizing deceleration. Days turned into weeks, and weeks bled seamlessly into agonizing months, with each passing sunrise diminishing the statistical probability of a meaningful resolution. The Honolulu Police Department, despite the dedication of its lead detectives, was fundamentally crippled by the absolute vacuum of actionable intelligence. They were attempting to construct a coherent narrative without a single foundational pillar, desperately grasping at phantom leads that dissolved into nothingness upon closer inspection. The detectives found themselves trapped in a cyclical nightmare of dead ends, continually revisiting the barren, leaf-covered patch of earth in Ala Moana Park, hoping against all logic that the environment might miraculously surrender a secret it had previously withheld. but the park remained resolutely silent. As new tragedies occurred across Honolulu, demanding the resources of the police force, Gabriel's file slowly migrated from the center of the detective's desk toward the periphery, a physical manifestation of an investigation slowly suffocating under the crushing, unavoidable weight of its own inertia. The most formidable obstacle that cemented the cold case status of this investigation was the impenetrable wall of silence erected by the nocturnal transient community. To understand why this case stalled so completely, one must examine the sociological dynamics of the unhoused population occupying all of Moana Park. This was not a community defined by permanent addresses, stable employment, or a profound trust in civic institutions. It was a fragile, ever-shifting ecosystem of survival, populated by individuals who were intrinsically wary of authority and heavily burdened by their own daily struggles to simply exist. When the detectives attempted to retrace Gabriel's final hours, they were essentially trying to map a ghost town where the residents possessed the ability to vanish at a moment's notice. The men who had been seen socializing and drinking with Gabriel on the night of April the 8th represented the single most critical key to unlocking the mystery of his death. Yet, they evaporated into the dense tropical nights without leaving